What's up, my people? Welcome to Fellowship Bible Church's Sermon Spotlight, where we're coming at you each and every week with a fresh weekend of debrief and effort to send biblical truth. And what better way to do that than by the power of conversation? I'm one of your hosts for today, Caleb Pearson, joining me as co-host in the other chair that we don't normally sit in, Miss Rose Lock. Rose, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be here. I haven't been here for a while.
For the record, Scott chose his chair, so it's not that we demoted you or moved you adjacent.
First. I just walked in, threw my stuff down, and here I am.
Contrary to how many words I use on this podcast, you're in charge. All right. So me and Rose are happy to be here with you. He was in the pulpit this past weekend. We'll be again next weekend. Scott, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it. Let's dive in. Rose, I'd love to get your take on the weekend, and Scott will come your way and just talk a little bit about the vision of what we're hoping to accomplish this past week.
It was a great sermon, and it snowed. And so if people don't know what weekend we're talking about, it snowed last Sunday, and I just thought it was a great decision for us to still be able to meet together. And there were a lot of people here, and so that was really encouraging and great. The sermon was so packed full. I have to tell you, I have the opportunity to come and I can listen to 3 sermons if I want to. And so I listened on Saturday and I took tons and tons and tons and tons of notes, but I still couldn't keep up with all those characters and everything I wanted to write about them. So I got to listen again in F1. I still missed a couple. And so I have my Saturday notes and my Sunday notes to have everything. I just thought it was really cool, Scott, how you took us through that Old Testament, and then the way you specifically addressed how each of them was called, because that's not something we often look at. We look at an overview of their story sometimes, but we don't often consider how did that person receive their call and what should we learn from it. So I really appreciated it, and I've just really enjoyed, honestly, over the last couple days, just reading through, like Joseph. You said God's call may send us through difficult times caused by the sins of other people. Right? So even though our times are difficult, it's not necessarily our own sin that's causing that difficulty. Or you said, Moses, God may call and send even in our fears and lack of courage. Right? So God's call may send us for Joshua. You said God's call may send us to roles that take all our strength or courage. And it was really a great, really fast overview of some really great information. So I really appreciated that. And then I really appreciated the time you spent in 2 Corinthians at the end. So this idea of an aroma, and because I'm an artist, I take terms like that and I start brainstorming, like aroma, what does that make me think of? And one of the things that encouraged me is you don't hear aromas. So I'm sometimes not very good at the way I verbalize the gospel, or sometimes it's not my natural bent to talk to people about that. But I hope that when they're around me, they can at least experience the aroma of the gospel. So anyway, those are just some of the things I got out of what I heard. And there's more, as always.
That's good. One thing I was going to ask you, Scott, I think it's an effective teaching tactic to start to name all these people that the Lord has worked through. Why focus on that? And instead of just maybe picking a couple New Testament passages and then encouraging all of us to respond to the call and to understand how we're sent, why take the time to go through all these specific examples? And what was it like leading up to this past weekend for you that you felt like, okay, this is the direction?
I actually left a lot of people out.
Can you give us some exampes?
Some examples
of people you considered using and left out?
Oh, in the Old Testament specific, almost all of the I took Judges and I brought them down to one paragraph. And that was just, I thought, okay, I'm going to condense that into one thing. And they had all the more flaws, each of them had more flaws than you could count, which I thought, well, that could be interesting, but no, I don't have the time. So I'm going to compress that a little bit. Most of the prophets had very specific calls to specific things. So those were two, I was like, okay, well, we're just going to go just condense this down to a few of those. But I really wanted to get this feeling, this picture that God has been in the business of calling and sending people since the beginning of creation. So this isn't new for us to be called, to be sent into the world with his message. So I wanted to get that feel of it. And the feel of these people weren't perfect. They weren't perfect. Their calls were all very unique. They were sent specifically to specific people or specific times with a message that was the same. So I kind of wanted to get that feel, and so we could feel the missionary heart of God, because He is always going back into creation, and now we are the church. Uh, we are that tool, that missionary tool that He's using.
Yeah, I think that's different than maybe if it's not a message we'll teach or people will hear it. Certainly they'll interpret it as such. Okay, your call is going to be super specific, super unique. God's going to work in uncharted, brand new ways in your life, and it's now responsible for you to go figure out what that's going to be like. What I appreciate about this is it's like, okay, the larger view I have of God, the smaller view I have of myself, the more I realize I can fit into the exact same story that they fit into.
Yeah.
And my context, my environment, my whatever, it is not God turning the page on some brand new uncharted waters. It really just brought me back to this idea of biblical dependency. Okay, there are examples of people yielding to that call and that send, and other people in the Bible who maybe didn't, or God didn't use in that way. And I just felt like it painted that picture wonderfully for me.
Yeah, I think we all have heard or asked even ourselves of what am I called to? Or we've heard people say, this is my calling. I'm called to this group or to that group or whatever. And I just appreciated, Scott, you just really simply answered the questions. We're called to do what? We're called to go and make disciples. So it's very clear, actually. And so we shouldn't be spending all of our time, what am I called to as a vocation, or what am I called to, whatever we get worried about. We just need to keep that in mind. I'm called to go and make disciples.
Yeah, and I think along with those lines, the calling can be general enough. We can all have that in common. And then we really start to invest in each other's lives, invest in our community. You've been on this podcast before. I've been in meetings with you before about you. You're trying to raise the awareness that we all have a mission field. And it's not just up to somebody else to do. Or maybe other churches will have a specific, they're the local outreach people, or they're the global missions people, and we support them by prayer and by money and by hearing from them once a year. Compared to raising this mentality of that biblical call knows no boundaries within the church. It's a call to believers. So is that part of the motivating factor for you this past weekend and this coming weekend? What was it about any conversations you had where the Christology series comes to an end? We're going to start the Gospel of Mark, but we're in this between where you get 2 weeks. Why? Some people are why is Scott up there? What's the deal here over these next 2 weeks? So help us clue us into what.
Why did they give him that?
What's the intentionality here?
Yeah, I mean, we're going through Christology, and you finish that up with this big what's next. Here is Jesus on the stage. And we turn the page to Acts. The church is blossoming, and it is moving forward, and people are being called into that movement of the church, the way, over and over and over again. And we're just an extension of that book. I don't think most people think about it, but Acts ends because that's the time period they're in, but we're still in the church age. We're still a part of that. The church histories are still a part of that, and God is still calling us into that story. So it's a great opportunity to point that out to folks, that you are still being called. You and me, we are still missionaries and ambassadors to this story. And what do you do next? What do you do next? What are the simple things you could do next? I think a lot of people think it's just difficult. It's hard. That, oh man, I'm going to have to step out of my comfort zone, even though that's not the goal. The goal is to be living in that, that it's just part of your everyday walk. That it's
that
not
mantra,
outside of your normal.
That mantra that you kind of, if I can call it a mantra, that you kind of said during the Building Bridges campaign, like live, work, and play. And I think that really is the important thing, because, after we're done recording this podcast, I'm going to go about my life. And what does my life look like? Who am I going to come in contact with for the rest of the day? And how am I going to be an aroma of Christ to them? And so I think that's like the key thing, is for us to start to think of our everyday walk as missional.
And I think along those lines, it helps de-spiritualize it in the sense that it demystifies the thing. Like, to wait to be convicted, okay, maybe I should do something, is to actually instead have a heart change and a perspective change on, okay, whatever you've called me to, Lord, help it be a mission field, just so that we don't slip into a legalism where maybe there's a ditch on either side. One is you're not missions focused at all. The other is you're missions focused with the wrong attitude or mindset. And so then you maybe, oh, I took that trip, or I did that thing. And then you wash your hands at the end of the day and say, I did it.
Yeah.
But instead of carrying yourself in such a way that it is part of who you are, this idea of an aroma of just like, there's something different about you. What is it? And we evangelize with our actions and our words.
Yeah, and our reminders, like I just saw an email about an hour and a half ago. Someone that I know had some kind of procedure. So someone else is saying, can you please email, if you're going to email that person, can you copy me so that you can get a timely response, right? So in my head, I'm like, okay, I need to send a note to that girl who had the procedure. I don't know what kind of procedure it is. I just know that she'll be off work for a few days, but I also know that she's not a believer and she's not a follower of Jesus Christ. So maybe in my simple act of sending her a note to tell her that I hope things are well, I'm thinking of her and I'm praying for her. And by the way, actually following through and praying for her, maybe in that simple act, somehow that's an aroma of Christ to her. And it can be, Paul talks about the seed being planted, watered, and then harvested. And so maybe that simple act can be that opportunity, which goes to kind of your applications of your sermon, right, Scott? Like you had 3 really good, let's see, what were they? Oh, ways that we can be blessings to other people. Words of affirmation, right? Acts of kindness or lightening the load is how you put it. And then gifts, something simple that encourages someone. That day.
Yeah, I appreciate the way your notes work too, Scott, as I look at how many citations of the Gospel John you used. I just appreciate you're going to list all these Old Testament figures all the way up through the New Testament, go to the Gospel John, and then a couple passages that deal with this idea of the Great Commission and the heart of the gospel. It reminds me this isn't just a one-off, okay, Santmier's up there, so we're going to hit on outreach and evangelism. It's actually just demonstrating this is always what should be of value in our minds instead of kind of fracturing it. And so I'm excited to see how it ties in, because I use that language so nonchalantly of just like, oh, okay, Christology's over, the Gospel of Mark series hasn't started yet. What's this one-off or separate thing going to be? But obviously everything we're trying to do, worship and teaching and all the things we offer on a weekly basis, we're not trying to separate all these different things and check the box and say, okay, we did it. But actually blend it all together to say, this is the picture.
Right. And because I'll say part of being a pleasing aroma, that you referred to that passage in 2 Corinthians, Scott. To me, part of that is what Mark Carey preached about the first Sunday of the new year, which is offering praise and thanksgiving. So if praise and thanksgiving are continuously on our lips and in our heart, that is going to be an aroma of Christ to people who don't know him. And that's going to be a way to be an ambassador by keeping those things close to our lips and our hearts.
And so often, and you mentioned this, we think, oh, it's one more thing to add to my list, or it's something else for me to do. It's it's this thing you need to do. And it's easy to get caught up in that. And I've told this story, I don't know how many times, and I get caught up in that too. I was going to a conference, a Christian conference, and I was on an airplane, and I decided, Lord, I'm going to share the gospel to whoever is sitting next to me, no matter what. I was kind of doing this thing. And this guy's beside me, and I'm talking with him, and he has no desire to talk to me. And we're like, 10 minutes before landing, and I actually asked him, so why are you going to, this place? And he says, well, I'm on my honeymoon. And I said, well, where's your wife? Because she's 6 rows ahead of us. If I would have taken the time to actually ask that question first and actually hear him,
you would have traded seats.
The most Christly thing to do would be to give him a seat. But nope, I had an agenda. And I didn't allow the Lord to work through me. I was doing it for the Lord. So it's usually a whole lot easier than we think it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's important to remember that that story is a great example of listening first, listening for the Lord, and allowing opportunities for Him to work.
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about the difference between creating opportunities and seizing them. When it comes to my job or really anything I feel convicted to do. We want to create opportunities. We want to make things happen. If it's a bad thing, that's obvious, but sometimes it's a good thing, and then it's not obvious that you're doing it out of order a little bit. What's the difference between Jesus being one tool on my tool belt, and I'll use him when I want to,
That's right,
versus seeing my entire life as a tool on Jesus's tool belt and submitting to his use? It's just a completely backwards way of thinking.
Absolutely. And it's really, one of my children has been having a really hard time finding a job. So my husband and I have often been having conversations about our job, our careers, right? And where we started and what our goals were for our careers and the doors God has opened and the doors God has closed. And I've just been reminded that God cares for us. God knows us. God made us. And so God has the right place for us. And we don't have to fear or fret or worry about what that's going to be, because he loves us. He cares for us. He will provide for us like he does for the lilies of the field. We just have to be open to his leading and rely on him to guide us in those directions. And it's the same for being an aroma of Christ to people. It's the same idea. As long as we're looking for opportunities, we're aware of opportunities. We know the gospel. I appreciated, by the way, Scott, you're real quick, like creation. Let's see. How did you say it? You said,
in a way I hadn't heard the creation, fall, redemption, and then culmination.
Yeah.
I've heard people say creation, fall, redemption, or renewal, like the state of the believer. But I found the culmination part interesting.
Yeah. So just knowing that simple tool of what the gospel is. And that reminded me, I wanted to ask Caleb if we could link. I really enjoyed the Building Bridges. You, Scott, and John Avery and Mark Francis sat down and walked through a curriculum together. And it was a video series that community groups could do. And my community group did it. I thought it was really, really good. And so I think that might be a tool that people might want to glance at as they're thinking through these issues, because it was really good about figuring out who you're being sent to and who you live, work, and play with and how to speak to them about the gospel. So.
It's good. Scott, would you care to, I want to talk about Fellowship Send and certainly take this opportunity to put that out there. But what can we look forward to this coming weekend with your time in the pulpit? Was there anything left on the cutting room floor this week that you want to lead into next week? It seems like it would be easy to say he covered it all this past Sunday. So what can we look forward to?
Well, for this coming week, it's really kind of the forward lean of being sent and of what church planting looks like. We as a body are called to continue that forward lean of church planting. It didn't just end in
Shenandoah.
It didn't just end it didn't just end in Antioch. It didn't just stop there in Philippi. It didn't just stop in, somewhere in Turkey. Those were great starts, but they continue on. There's this continuation. So why are we called to plant churches? Why is that our responsibility? Why do we think that that's the next thing we ought to do? And then specifically for Fellowship Bible Church, what are we called? Why do we feel called to plant churches, and what does that look like? And so that takes us right into Fellowship Send. When Rose had mentioned a couple of times, the aroma of Christ, and Eugene Peterson's the message, he uses the word redolent.
It's a great word.
It's a great word, but it's this picture that this aroma somehow brings back a memory. When you smell chocolate chip cookies baking, what memory does that bring? Or
a skunk.
Or a skunk.
When you're hunting with your dad or somebody's, your grandmother's perfume. Or
what does that bring back? What does that emotional thing bring back? And I think there's a real tie each one of us have, when we smell the aroma of Christ, we immediately go, oh, that's a little portrait of Jesus. And that's what the church as a whole is called to be a portrait of Christ in the community. How do we go about doing that?
Yeah, so it's like when you meet, it's like when you're in a situation, I can think of a couple situations I've been in where it's obvious that Christ is not the center of what's going on, whether it be that there's obviously a worldview that's not representative of the Christian worldview that's being presented, or whether it just be the atmosphere feels a little oppressive, or whatever that might be. It's almost like you can, from a mile away, spot the one other person in the room who's like drawing you to themselves, or who is just as uncomfortable as you are. It's almost like you have like this like-mindedness. And it is almost like an aroma. It's not anything any of you says. It's not anything maybe even you specifically do. It's just something in them that you can see the light and life of Christ living in them. I pray that often. I pray that people will see Christ in me, because I know that I, in my flesh, am not always representing him as well as I could be.
Yeah, I think that's the burden of ministry. It's the burden of it. And it's an encouraging element of belonging to the church, is like people are going to see you broken, but pointing them to Christ at the same time, and making sure our efforts kind of have a unified front in that. And so like thinking about Fellowship Send, and I want to ask you about this mystery night, if you want to just give us a quick elevator pitch of it that's coming up this Sunday night. It's a reminder that we're all in this together, and that we can all not just have a unified vision, be like, that sounds, according to me, that sounds good, right? This isn't just a whitehouse.org petition you can sign and move on. It's not a door-to-door, sure, I'll take a box of cookies, but it's actually participating in it, and then realizing there are so many different ways you can support and participate what we're doing here at FBC. So share a little bit about this event coming up. And
a story that I'm going to tell this coming weekend, and I'll tell pieces of it now. We went to India to visit with our missionary friends there. And during that time, we went to the next village over. Thotagary was the name of the village. And we were going to do a night of worship and fun on this patch of dirt. It was literally just a patch of dirt that was across the road, which was another patch of dirt, from a Hindu temple. And we went, we set up sound and lights, and we just started singing songs, and people started coming out and from the village, just coming to see what was going on. And they joined in, and we had glow sticks to give to kids, and it was just just an amazing little evening. They'd been praying about this little plot of dirt and turning it into a church. So not long after that event, they started having a Sunday school class on that plot of dirt. And about a year later, they decided they'd like to purchase that plot of dirt and to build a building on it. So we asked the youth department, or the children's department here, that during VBS, if they would take up a collection that we could give to them to help them in this process. And in that process, they raised enough money to buy that piece of land and build a building. And even now, that church is a growing, standalone, solid church. So everybody had a part of that. And Fellowship Send is a lot like that. We all have a part to play. I mean, we're talking kids who are in kindergarten who are bringing in change. We're a part of planning a church in India. So when we came back from that, the thoughts in our minds were, why aren't we doing that here? There's a patch of dirt somewhere that there are people surrounding it who need to hear the gospel. Why aren't we doing that here? So Fellowship Send is the furthest extent, I guess, of being prepared and deployed because you're being deployed out of this body of believers into another community for the purpose of planning a church. So next week, the mystery night, to kind of unveil the mystery of what fellowship Send is. It's an opportunity to come and to enjoy the evening. It's a fun time. That's one thing I want people to realize. It's a fun time. This is not just a, hey, let's just sit here and listen to somebody talk. I could do that. I could bore you pretty quickly, actually. I could bore you pretty quickly with it. But this is an opportunity to, as a group of folks around a table, to kind of go through an escape room type series of puzzles to learn. You're actually learning about what church planning is and what Fellowship Send is and how these things work and how you can be a part. It's a timed event, so there's some competition going on there, and the prizes are dessert. So there's dessert.
Is there chocolate involved in the prize
table?
So
the prizes are
if there's
dessert,
chocolate.
better dessert, and best
nice.
dessert. So there is some competition there, and then there will be opportunity for them to be able to respond and actually be a part, even that night, to be a part in that. And there'll be a time where we'll gather folks around their tables through a guided time of prayer as well. So it's a good family night because there's everything from scavenger hunts to you name it. So kids can be a part of it. So we want people to enjoy that.
Well, and I'm hearing from a lot of families that are, feeling that cabin fever a little bit. All this snow, it's like bitterly cold and dark by 4 p.m. So come fellowship with us.
I mean, walking across the courtyard, and it was,
for this podcast.
17 degrees.
We had a meeting on this side of the world this morning, and people came from the other side with gloves and hats on. And I asked someone to check my mailbox, and they were like, sure. And they wrapped a scarf around their neck. So we are all very cold.
Yeah, so please come out and join us with that. That'll be this Sunday, 6 to 7:30.
6 to 7:30.
Here on campus. So we hope to see you guys there. And Scott, maybe we'll have to have you on next week as well. Debrief that a little bit and do it again. Thank you for being here.
Yeah,
appreciate it. Rose, you're awesome. Appreciate it. You did a great job in that chair, by the way.
Oh,
for what it's
the
worth.
chair works.
As a reminder to our viewers and listeners.
I'll just I'll play Ring Around the Rosie
just
every
rotate
time
around.
I come in.
Yeah, maybe we'll get a couch in here eventually. You never know. Remember, guys, we love to hear from you. You can send over your thoughts or questions right where you can find us at fbcva.org/podcast or on your favorite podcast channel. The fact of the matter, everybody, is that sermons are not meant to just take an hour, but rather transform a lifetime. Until next week, much love. God bless.